You know, it's a rather curious thing, this obsession we have with finding ourselves. Everyone seems to be on a journey, a quest, a spiritual scavenger hunt to locate this mysterious me that is supposedly hiding somewhere behind the eyes, or between the thoughts, or tucked neatly away in the dark corners of the psyche. And yet, the more feverishly we search, the more the whole thing slips right through our fingers, like trying to hold a handful of water by squeezing tighter. So let us begin, not with a map, nor a method, but with a simple question. What exactly are you looking for when you seek yourself? Most people imagine that there is some solid, stable, crystalline essence, an inner core that, once found, will make everything clear, as though the self were a jewel buried under layers of confusion. But suppose for a moment that the jewel was never there. Suppose the very urge to search is the veil that obscures what's always been present. You see, when you try to watch your own eyes, when you try to bite your own teeth, when you try to understand the one who is understanding, you are attempting something fundamentally impossible. It's like the sound of a hand clapping by itself. You are the process trying to capture itself. And the harder you look, the more absurd the whole activity becomes. Imagine a cat chasing its own tail. Round and round it goes, quite convinced that salvation lies in the next turn, the next leap. But the tail is not something separate. It belongs to the cat. It is the cat. And if the creature would only stop spinning for a moment, it would see that what it wants is already part of what it is. This is the great paradox of self-discovery. The seeker is the sought. The questioner is the answer. The journey is the destination. But as long as you keep seeking, you create a subtle distance, an illusory gap between what you think you are and what you actually are. That gap becomes the very suffering that pushes you to search even more desperately. A loop, a cycle, a cosmic game of hide and seek in which you are both the hider and the seeker, and neither ever wins. And let me tell you something rather liberating. You don't need to win. You see, life is not requiring you to achieve some spiritual finality, some grand revelation that declares, now I know who I am. The universe has never demanded such seriousness from you. It simply invites you to be, to dance, to breathe, to experience, to participate in this extraordinary play of forms, colors, sensations, and thoughts without clinging to the role you imagine you must play. When you stop seeking yourself, when the effort melts away, something beautiful happens. A kind of spaciousness opens, a sense of ease, as though you've been holding your breath for years and finally exhale. And in that moment, you begin to sense something far more intimate than any concept of self you might try to construct. You find a presence, a simplicity, a quiet awareness that doesn't need defining. And this presence has been here all along, listening, watching, experiencing, not as a separate observer, but as the very activity of life itself. You don't find it like an object. You relax into it. You stop resisting it. And in this stopping, in this effortless surrender, you arrive. And as you arrive, though nothing has moved and no distance has been crossed, you begin to notice that this presence is not something you own. It is not contained within the boundary of your skin, nor does it start or stop where your thoughts begin and end. Rather, it permeates everything. It is the hum behind experience, the stillness beneath the movement, the space within which the whole play of existence unfolds. But the mind, clever little trickster that it is, isn't satisfied with such simplicity. It wants labels. It wants explanations. It wants a certificate of authenticity that says, yes, this is your true self. Congratulations, you finally found it. The mind insists on making the infinite small enough to fit into a sentence, a belief, or an identity badge. And that is precisely where the mischief begins. You see, the moment you try to own this presence, it slips away. Why? Because ownership implies separation, the one who owns and the thing being owned. But presence is not two things. It's not even one thing. It's not a thing at all. It's more like the open sky, vast, ungraspable, yet ever-present. When you try to grasp the sky, your hands close around nothing. But that nothing is not a failure. It is freedom. Let me illustrate this in another way. Think of a mirror. The mirror reflects whatever appears before it. Mountains, faces, clouds, storms, the flicker of candlelight, all drift across the field of experience. But beneath all that movement is a clarity that does not change, a knowing that is not dependent on what it knows, a being that does not depend on what it appears to be in any given moment. But here's the subtle beauty. The moment you try to be the mirror, you're no longer reflecting. You're performing. You're taking the role of the one who reflects. Yet the true mirror doesn't act like a mirror. It simply is.
The ego loves the idea of awakening. It loves the image of clarity, of spiritual success, of arriving at some mountaintop where all problems dissolve into a blissful haze. But awakening is not an achievement. It is an undoing, a softening, a letting go of the very pursuit that the ego uses to define itself. So let us return to this notion of arrival. When you stop seeking yourself, it becomes abundantly clear that there was never a seeker to begin with, just the seeking, just the movement of life unfolding in a particular pattern, like a whirlpool in a stream. A whirlpool looks like a separate thing. It spins, it swirls, it appears to have a center. But if you reach into it, there's nothing there except water in motion. In the same way, what you call yourself is a pattern, a dance of thoughts, sensations, memories, and hopes, swirling in the vast stream of existence. Beautiful, transient, ever-changing, but not solid, not fixed, not something you can pin down. And this, rather than being frightening, is wonderfully liberating, because when there's no rigid self to defend, no solid identity to uphold, life becomes lighter, more fluid. You begin to move with the current instead of battling against it. You stop trying to become, and you start simply being. And in simply being, you begin to notice the world in a new way. Colors seem a little more vivid, as though someone turned the dimmer switch up on existence. Sounds become richer, not because they've changed, but because you're no longer listening through the filter of a self, trying to interpret, categorize, or control them. Life starts to feel less like a puzzle and more like a symphony, one you don't have to understand to enjoy. You see, a great misunderstanding persists in the human mind, that clarity must come through effort, that peace must be wrestled into existence through discipline. But clarity is what shines through the cracks when effort ceases. Peace is what remains when the storm of striving finally wears itself out. Trying to find yourself through force or discipline is like stirring muddy water in the hope that it will become clear. But the more you stir, the cloudier it gets. Only when you stop, when you allow the water to settle on its own, does its natural clarity reveal itself. And here is the delightful twist. You didn't create the clarity. You didn't achieve it. You merely stopped disturbing the waters. This is the essence of arrival. effortlessness, rest, allowing. Yet many people fear this kind of surrender. They worry that if they stop seeking, stop striving, they'll become passive or stagnant. But surrender does not mean inaction. It means acting from a place of wholeness rather than fragmentation. It means moving with life instead of against it. Effortless action is not laziness, it is harmony. Take a tree, for instance. It doesn't strain to grow. It doesn't grit its teeth to reach for the sun. It simply expresses its nature. It unfolds because unfolding is what it does. Now imagine if a tree had a human mind. It might worry, am I growing properly? Should I be taller by now? What is my true purpose as an oak? Perhaps I should compare myself to the pine next to me. And in all this anxious rumination, it would miss the simple truth that growth happens by itself in its own timing, without the need for anxious supervision. You too are like this tree. Life is unfolding through you without you needing to micromanage it. The heartbeat, the breath, the impulses, the intuitions, these arise spontaneously, as naturally as the tide going in and out. You don't have to orchestrate them. In fact, you couldn't if you tried. Once this is understood, not merely intellectually, but viscerally, you begin to relax into the flow of things. You realize that you don't need to force your life into shape like a sculptor chiseling marble. You are more like a wave in the ocean, taking shape according to the movement of the whole. And here's the astonishing realization. The moment you stop trying to shape yourself into what you think you ought to be, you begin to reveal what you've always been. Not the idea of you, not the image, not the persona, but the underlying reality that precedes all of it. It's a bit like removing a mask you forgot you were wearing. At first, the bare face feels unfamiliar, even vulnerable. But then, with a kind of quiet surprise, you realize that the face underneath was always more authentic, more intimate, more alive than the borrowed identity you had been presenting to the world. Now, this doesn't mean the mask was wrong. Masks are part of the play. They help us navigate the stage. But the struggle begins when we mistake the mask for the one who wears it, when the performance becomes the performer. And in seeking yourself, you have been trying to discover the actor by interrogating the costume. The moment you stop this interrogation, when you allow the costume to simply be what it is without demanding metaphysical answers from it, the actor steps forward, not as a separate entity, but as the living presence behind all roles. Arrival is noticing that presence. And this presence, this quiet, radiant awareness, is not something you can point to. It has no shape, no color, no form you can identify. Yet it is more intimate than breath, more fundamental than thought. It is the very condition for anything to appear at all. Without it, no sound could be heard, no image seen, no emotion felt. Presence is the stage upon which the whole play of life unfolds, yet it never demands applause, never seeks recognition. It is like the space in a room. You notice the furniture, the paintings, the movement of people coming and going. But the space itself? It is rarely acknowledged, yet everything depends on it. Without the space, nothing could be arranged, nothing could exist in any coherent way. And so, too, with awareness. It's the spaciousness in which your experience unfolds. When you stop seeking a self inside the content of experience, you begin to notice the space that holds it all. But noticing is a delicate thing. The moment you try to stare at awareness like you would an object, it vanishes, because you've turned it into something separate. You've made a knower and a known, when in truth, the knowing is seamless. Awareness is not something you look at. It's the light by which you see. Now, some people, upon hearing this, think, I understand. I must remain as awareness. And immediately they become tense, vigilant, determined not to slip back into identification. But this is just another form of seeking to remain in a state, seeking to maintain a spiritual posture. Awareness is not a state. It is what's present in every state. You don't have to hold on to it, maintain it, or cultivate it like some fragile flower. You can't fall out of awareness any more than a wave can fall out of the ocean. The wave may rise and fall, crest and crash, but its essence is always water. Likewise, whatever you experience, confusion, clarity, sadness, joy, you remain what you are. Not the wave, but the watery substance of being. This is why arrival is so peaceful, because there's nothing left to sustain. You don't have to keep up the act. You don't have to pretend to be awakened or insightful or put together. You don't have to protect an image of yourself or justify your existence through achievements or spiritual credentials. You can, at last, be ordinary, and in that ordinariness, discover something extraordinary. It's a peculiar relief, isn't it, to realize you don't have to become someone. All your life you've been encouraged to strive, to achieve, to define yourself through what you do or what you believe. But the self you've been trying to construct is like a soap bubble, beautiful, shimmering, but empty inside, and just as fragile. When the bubble pops, nothing is lost, only the illusion of separation. Think for a moment of a melody. The notes rise and fall, creating shape and movement. But the silence between the notes is just as essential. Without that silence, there would be no music, only noise. In the same way, you are not just the content of your life, the events, the personality, the memories, but also the quiet, boundless depth in which these events appear. So when you stop seeking yourself, you don't become empty in the hollow sense. You become spacious, open, receptive to the whole symphony of life. You begin to sense that everything arising in your experience, joy, sorrow, confusion, clarity, is part of a larger rhythm. A rhythm you are not controlling, but participating in. And participation is far more natural than control. Participation is what life has been inviting you into from the very beginning, not as a separate individual trying to navigate a foreign world, but as an expression of the world itself. Like a wave participating in the motion of the sea, you are the universe expressing itself in a particular form, not apart from it, not in conflict with it, but arising with it, as it. And when you see this, something inside you unclenches. The tight grip you've kept around your identity begins to soften. You realize you don't have to hold everything together. You don't have to maintain a story about who you are. For the story is not the being. It never was. It's just a set of symbols, like a map that hints at a territory far more vast and alive than the ink lines that describe it. This loosening, this opening, allows you to see that life is not happening to you, nor are you the one making it happen. Life is happening as you. Just as fire burns, the sun shines, the birds sing, your consciousness is an activity of the cosmos. And when you stop seeking yourself, you stop resisting this activity. You fall in step with the rhythm that has been carrying you all along. Let me paint a scene for you. Imagine standing on the shore, watching waves roll in. Each wave has a shape, a crest, a personality almost. It seems distinct from the others. But no wave has ever been separate from the ocean. It moves with the whole body of water, influenced by winds and tides, by the moon pulling subtly at the sea. A wave might imagine, if it could think, that it has to push itself toward the shore. But in truth, it's being carried, effortlessly. Now imagine that wave suddenly realizing this. Could you imagine the relief? This is the relief of arrival. You are not an isolated entity trying to steer the universe. You are a gesture of the universe, a momentary expression like a wave, a breeze, a spark. And when you stop trying to define yourself, defend yourself, or improve yourself into some idealized version, you begin to feel that larger movement. You sense that everything is unfolding in perfect synchronicity, whether you understand it or not. Understanding is not necessary for participation.
In fact, too much insistence on understanding can block the experience altogether. Think of a dancer on stage. If she suddenly becomes self-conscious, wondering whether her arms are moving correctly, whether the audience approves, her movements become stiff, unnatural. She falls out of harmony with the music. But when she forgets herself, when she dissolves into the motion, something magical happens. The dance flows through her. You, in the same way, begin to live more fluidly when you stop trying to choreograph your existence. The music of life moves you. Thoughts come, actions arise, choices unfold, not because you are forcing them, but because you are attuned to a deeper rhythm. This is not passivity. In fact, it's the opposite. It's aliveness, spontaneity, a sense of being fully present without the burden of self-consciousness weighing on your shoulders. When you stop seeking yourself, you start responding to life directly, rather than reacting through the lens of a constructed identity. You hear the world more clearly because you're not filtering everything through the question, "What does this say about me?" You see others more intimately because you no longer need them to validate or affirm your existence. You discover, perhaps for the first time, what it means to listen without defense, to see without judgment, to act without hesitation. This immediacy is not something you can cultivate. It emerges naturally when the search for a fixed self falls away. And with this immediacy comes a profound sense of connection, not the connection of two separate entities finding common ground, but the connection of recognizing yourself in everything around you. The trees, the wind, the laughter of children, the quiet hum of nighttime. They all seem to reflect something of your own nature. For you were never separate from them. You were only seeking yourself in the wrong places. And when you recognize yourself in everything, a gentle warmth begins to permeate your experience, a kind of effortless compassion, not the moral obligation to be kind, but the natural kindness that arises when the boundaries between self and other grow thin. You don't force it. You don't practice it like a discipline. It flows from the simple understanding that you are meeting different expressions of the same life that animates you. Just as your left hand does not resent your right hand, you begin to feel a quiet intimacy with the world. This intimacy is not sentimental. It is not based on emotional highs. It's a deep, abiding familiarity, as though you are finally recognizing a face that has been looking back at you since the beginning. And the beautiful irony here is that the moment you stop seeking yourself, the world stops being something out there, separate and indifferent. It becomes part of your own unfolding. The trees are not merely objects to be looked at. They are gestures of the same mystery that beats your heart. The sky is not merely a backdrop. It is the vastness that lives in you. Every sound, every sight, every sensation becomes a reminder of the same underlying presence you once tried so desperately to find inside your mind. Now, this realization doesn't mean your life becomes free of difficulty. Challenges still arise, storms still come, but your relationship to them changes. Instead of seeing difficulties as threats to your identity, they become movements within the greater dance. The rain that falls on the sea does not interrupt the wave. It is simply another expression of the same water. In this way, suffering loses its sharp edge. It's not that pain disappears. It's that the resistance to pain softens. You stop interpreting every discomfort as a sign of personal failure or spiritual inadequacy.
Pain becomes what it is, a passing weather pattern in the sky of consciousness, something to be felt fully and allowed to move on. When you stop seeking yourself, you also stop seeking a life that is free of all discomfort. Instead, you begin to touch a kind of peace that exists even in the midst of discomfort, a peace that comes from no longer fighting with reality. The war with the moment ends, and in the absence of conflict, peace reveals itself naturally. You may notice, too, that your actions become simpler. You're no longer torn between competing identities or driven by the need to prove something. Decisions arise more organically, more intuitively. You act from clarity, not compulsion. You speak from presence, not performance. And in doing so, your life begins to have a certain ease, even in its complexity. This ease is not the ease of a life without challenges, but the ease of knowing you are not separate from the flow of events. You are not pushing a boulder uphill, you are moving with the current. And when the current shifts, when life demands strength or patience or surrender, you respond without the old confusion, without the frantic search for who you're supposed to be in that moment. You simply are. And from that being, doing arises naturally. It is a wonderful relief, isn't it? To discover that you don't have to find yourself in order to live fully. In fact, the more you release the search, the more vivid life becomes. Every moment feels like an invitation, a chance to participate in the unfolding mystery without needing to understand it or claim it as your own. And if there is a final secret to this whole matter, it is this: arrival was never a destination. It was the recognition that you have always been home. Home, you see, is not a place in time or space. It is not a point you reach after years of spiritual labor or psychological refinement. Home is the simple, immediate actuality of this moment, before the mind carves it into pieces, before thought names it, before you position yourself inside it as a seeker or a struggler. It is the unadorned presence of being here, now, without the story of who you think you are or ought to be. And this is why the search could never succeed. You were looking for yourself as an object, something you could grasp, define, and hold up to the light. But you are not an object. You are the light by which objects are seen. You were searching for the traveler, not realizing you were the traveling. You were looking for the river, not seeing that you were its flowing.
But now the search grows quiet. Not because you solved anything, not because you've arrived at some extraordinary spiritual understanding, but because you've glimpsed the futility of looking for what is already here. The silence that follows is not empty. It is full of clarity, full of intimacy, full of the gentle recognition that nothing was missing. And when you relax into that silence, life begins to reveal itself in ways you may have overlooked before. The small things, the flicker of sunlight on a wall, the sound of distant laughter, the warmth of your own breath take on a luminous quality. You begin to realize that the extraordinary is woven into the ordinary, that every moment is shimmering with a kind of quiet miracle. You see, people often imagine awakening as a grand event, something earth-shattering, something that transforms the world into a realm of constant bliss. But the truth is softer, subtler. Awakening is the rediscovery of the obvious. It is the recognition that the simple fact of existing, of being aware, is already profound beyond measure. Bliss may come, bliss may go, clarity may wax and wane, but the ground of your being remains, steady, open, untroubled. And this recognition brings with it a humility, not the humility of self-denial, but the humility of belonging. You realize that you are part of something vast, something timeless, something infinitely creative. And this belonging doesn't shrink you, it expands you.
It frees you from the burden of having to manufacture meaning or justify your existence. Meaning flows naturally, like a river winding its way through the landscape. From this place, you begin to trust life more, not because you expect it to conform to your desires, but because you sense that you are not separate from it. You are not an isolated observer peering out at a hostile or indifferent universe. You are the universe, looking back at itself through a particular pair of eyes. You are life, tasting its own sweetness and its own bitterness with equal acceptance. And so when joy comes, you welcome it. When sorrow comes, you welcome that too. Not because you are trying to be noble or spiritual, but because you understand that both are waves on the same ocean. You allow them to rise and fall, to crest and break, without trying to cling to the one or escape the other. In this allowing, in this profound letting be, you find a peace that cannot be shaken. A peace not dependent on circumstances or accomplishments. A peace that comes from no longer resisting the nature of things. So when you stop seeking yourself, you finally arrive. Not at a destination, but at a recognition. A recognition that you are inseparable from the very life you've been trying to understand. That you are the dance you've been watching, the song you've been trying to hear, the mystery you've been trying to grasp. And as this recognition settles into your bones, you discover the simplest and most liberating truth of all. You have always been here. You have always been this. You have always been home.